In January of 2015, after years of jury-rigging clamping solutions for work holding, I embarked on my workbench project. I ended up choosing a split-top rouleau with hardware and bench designed by a small, family-owned company in Iowa called BenchCrafted. The top slab is 4 inches thick and over 7 feet long and is made of laminated pieces of soft maple. I individually milled each of the pieces using power tools and then did some fine-tuning with a jointer plane. I then laminated the pieces into 2 slabs weighing around 100 pounds each, which I then wrestled through the planer to flatten them out. Nearly a year later, after building the base and adding the tail vise hardware, I had the beginnings of a work surface. In a perfect world, the bench top would be flat and true, but in reality, due to accumulated error in milling the individual laminates, along with imperfections in the base, you will inevitably end up with a top that is out of flat. In my case, I had a pretty significant twist, up to 3/16 of an inch difference between the corners. To flatten the top, you have 2 main choices, hand tools or power tools, and I chose the latter. For this, I turned to the build videos from Marc Spagnuolo on his Wood Whisperer Guild site. He has an excerpt available on his free site which details the process using a router sled. The router sled technique for flattening wide surfaces is not a new idea. Notably, Nick Offerman, best known for playing Ron Swanson on Parks and Recreation, is also an accomplished woodworker and has been featured a number of times in Fine Woodworking magazine. He runs a shop in Los Angeles where he specializes in building furniture with large slabs, which he flattens using a router sled of his own design. I began the process by defacing my entire bench top. If you have small children, now might be a good time to get them in the shop. You need a large router bit to do the cutting, and I chose a 1.5 inch straight bit made by Freud. Another option would be Infinity Tools, which makes a bit specialized for the purpose. My router sled is fairly simple, made of standard 3/4 inch plywood with double laminates for the router guides to prevent sag. I added a 1.5 inch wide lip on either side of the guides to allow for fences that I made out of scrap wood with a T-nut and star knobs to secure them in place. These fences limit yaw and torque as the sled rides the rails. Another change I made to Marc's method was adding an inner rail set slightly below the level of the bench top. This allows the router bit to travel all the way across the bench top and not leave scallops on the edges. To make the rails, I milled standard 8-foot lengths of 2x lumber, the best that I could on my jointer and planer. To get the top edges of the 2 rails to match as closely as possible, I took a tip from Matt Cremona and ganged up the 2 pieces and ran them through the planer on edge. I then attached the inner rail with screws, clamped it to the sides of the bench, and did a test run. For this technique to work, the rails have to be coplanar. I initially used Marc's technique with a coated wire, which worked well. However, when I had to make adjustments after I'd removed the wires, my laziness kicked in and I looked for another way. I realized I could do the same thing with a level on the sled. I happened to have a digital level, which I zeroed on one edge of the bench, and then adjusted the rails until it stayed on 0 across the whole run. Note that this does not ensure the top is level with the floor or even left to right, just flat relative to itself. Before I got started with the real work, I decided to soup up my router a bit. I set my depth stop to hit the lowest spot on the bench and started making passes left to right. As I mentioned, on the corners I was taking nearly 3/16 of an inch off with each pass. I clamped some stops on either side of the sled so that I didn't run into the outer rail with the bit. Using guide marks that I'd made on the rail, I moved the sled forward an inch each time, allowing for substantial overlap between passes with the 1.5 inch bit. Note the pencil marks being erased with every pass. I chose to leave the bench dogs in place for this process so that they would be flush with the top. This meant that I was routing end grain, which led to predictably ratty cuts, but this was easily corrected with some sanding afterwards. After 87 passes, I ended up with a pretty substantial pile of wood shavings, which, if nothing else, made for some pretty pictures. The bench was now flat, but with obvious track marks from the router. The fences had kept these marks even and consistent, so you could theoretically leave them for a grippy surface, but I chose to hit it with a random orbit sander and 80 grit paper. I did not sand finer than this to prevent the top from becoming too slippery. And then it came time to check the result with a straight edge, which it passed easily. After a lot more work on the finishing touches, I ended up with a workbench that will likely outlast me.